Welcome to this introduction for the Promise 3, reporting, communication, etc. We are making these videos in the hopes that you will watch them very carefully in preparation for the project kickoff meeting. That way, when we actually meet in person, meet online at the same time, we can focus on what needs to be clarified and what we need to discuss, rather than on the parts of the meeting that are mostly me and my team presenting to you. Let's get into it. So you might have watched the video introducing this meeting, which introduced not only Zoom, but also gave a brief overview of Teams. And you may already know that we are going to be using Teams in this project, both for all partners to have access to the templates and tools and resources and links, etc. for the project, but also it's where, when you are reporting to the CVSS as a lead partner, that's where you will upload all of your documents and things of this nature. So let's just take a real brief look. I want to start here by saying that not every person assigned to this project needs to have access to Teams. It's absolutely acceptable if only one person from your organization actively uses Teams and is responsible for getting you the templates and uploading the reporting documents, but we're absolutely happy to invite anybody who should have access, including national training coordinators, anyone who's involved in project administration and finance. What you will see when we add you is you will see, I have more things here, but you will see Promise, you will see something called General. This is the General channel. And then you'll also have your organization and private channel. So when you go to organization, private channel, I don't think that Manobanahusa has put anything here yet, and you go to files, this is where you should be uploading all of the files that you need to upload to us, and you can use this files section to organize whatever files that you want related to Promise 3. Let's first go to the Resources tab, and this is where you will find resources, of course. For example, the Guide for Applicants, the Annex on Financial Provisions, and the Grant Agreement are the three documents issued from the EU that are regulating the project. So in terms of what are we required a la the EU, these are the three documents that we refer to most often. When you scroll down, you'll see specific instructions on what is required for payments from us during the project. This has to do with what we have agreed on in the consortium agreement. Further down below, there's lists of what documents you need to keep in one format or another for purposes of reporting the project. And then at the bottom of this resources is, in plain language, a description of everyone's roles and responsibilities throughout the project. So our goal with this resources tab is that this is the first place that you go to when you have questions about the project, in terms of what are the rules from the EU that apply, in terms of if you need more information about how to use the EU funding and tenders portal, if you need to figure out what your roles and responsibilities are, how to get a first payment, what documents you need to be keeping, and a whole lot more. Come here first. In the Files section, you will find documents from this project launch meeting that we're having now, templates that we are using throughout the project. We will go into these in more detail. You will find the logos and the fonts and the style guide and similar resources. More of them are coming here soon. And you will find a standard backpage, which we'll be looking at soon as well. The third most important tab here is the project contact list. Now this is organized in a way that if you want to email, for example, everyone who has to do with the therapy trainings, you can select these here, copy and paste them into your email, and you have just emailed all of the therapy training coordinators plus the additional people involved in the project that you might also need to be emailing. So this is kept here for everybody to reference when and as needed, and we will keep it updated. Now, about that list of documents and evidence that we need to be keeping on file in one format or another as we go along through the project. It's important that every single one of us on this project is aware of what the requirements are, and possibly also why we are keeping these documents, because it is a team effort. It is a lot of details to keep track of. And if we are all doing this together along the way, not at the end of the project, then we're going to be in really good shape. And then when it comes to actually finalizing the report and sending it off to the commission, and in case we are ever audited, we will have very little to worry about. So, once again, when you go to the Resources tab in Teams, you'll find this document that keeps track of all of the instructions that you need to know, such as keeping these records. And there's different levels of records that we need to keep. For example, some records that you keep, you send to the CBSS for purposes of the grander final reporting, and also so that we can use your reports to make communications about the project. There's some records that you keep on file, either digitally or in binders or both, in case of audit. And then there's some files that you do all of the above and that you upload to the EU as part of the final reporting. So for timesheets, there is not a required format. We do have two templates for you. You can use whatever time recording system that you already have. However, before you decide if you can use that, then you should check in the grant agreement and in the other EU regulating documents about if the information that you have on your timesheets meets the requirements that is set out by the EU of what your timesheets need to include. Let's take a look at one of our templates that are available for you to use. So in this template, you'll see that up at the top here, we very clearly reference that this is having to do with Promise 3. It's important also that you not only track the time you spend working on Promise 3, but that you also track the time that you spend on your regular work or other projects. So in this example, column C, this is October 2015, October 1st. Say I worked 2 hours on Promise, and say I worked 6 hours on something else. And the reason why it's like this is the EU does not base the amount the project costs in terms of employment costs based on an hourly rate. It's based on a percentage. So that's why you have to keep track of your hours like this. And it is best to do this as you go along, daily, weekly, at the absolute max, monthly. You have to have comments about what you are working on in the project. And then timesheets must be certified by 2 people, yourself and a supervisor. If you don't have a supervisor, for example, if you're the director or such, it doesn't matter, somebody else in the organization needs to certify that your timesheets are real. If we take a look at timesheet B example, this is a timesheet where, say, you're in several EU projects, then this column is for Promise 3. You'll note that we put the Promise 3 project number here, and then you can put your other projects here, other activities. So in the case that you're on multiple EU project activities, then you can still keep track of all of your projects without having to have multiple timesheets. That becomes very messy very easily. And of course with timesheets, you shouldn't be putting time on a day that you are on sick leave or on holiday or on weekends or things like this. So you really do need to be careful. So now we're back into the Resources tab. We're looking at the things to keep on file. I'm scrolling down now to get to the meat of what everybody needs to know about. The rest we can cover in the advanced video. I want to start with the activity report. Anytime that you do an activity that doesn't necessarily lead to a specific output. For example, if you're writing a document, then the document itself, the publication, is the output. But if you have a meeting, for example, or there's different types of activities where it's not otherwise reported how the activity happened and who was involved and these types of things. So to support you in this, we have created an activity report template, and you will find it in the Files section. Templates for reporting and activity preparation. An activity report template. Part of the purpose of this activity report template is to help you to prepare in advance of the activity, of the meeting, all of the things that you need to think about early on to make sure that you have everything in place according to how we've described it in the project, and also in terms of what documents you need to have at the end. So if we take a look at the template here, we've got an invitation, agenda, signed participants list, presentations, whatever materials that you used or disseminated, if you had any press releases or resulting media, social media, photos, evaluations. The EU logo and disclaimer, we'll talk about that again later. Procurement proof on file for all expenses, boarding passes, train tickets, bus tickets. So this is the core things that every activity, especially meetings, needs to have on file. Some of this you send to CBSS, some of this you keep on file in binders only, and some of this you send to the EU through the EU funding intenders portal. Assigned participants list. This is something that we have another template for. Let's take a look at this specifically. So here we have a template for assigned participants list. So at a minimum, you need to have a name and a signature. I've also included a column here for boarding passes. So if you have somebody traveling to a meeting and you want to keep track that you have of everyone's boarding passes or anything else that you need to actually get from them, then that's what that column is there for. And let's talk briefly about when you need a signed participants list. You need to have a signed participants list anytime that you arrange a meeting that is paid for with the project. So for example, if you go to a conference that's organized by another organization, I guess you could put, if it's Promise 3 related, then you could put your time on your timesheets of going to that conference, that it's somehow, part of your work on the project. But because that meeting is paid for by somebody else and not by you for Promise 3, then you don't need signatures on anything. However, if you're having a small conference or a meeting, people are coming to you, then that's when you need to have a signed participants list. Within this project, specifically the national training coordinators, you have written into the project that you will have small group or one-on-one supervision mentorship meetings. And for that, I had the feeling that that a signed participants list would be a bit overkill. So something that we have developed to help you is this mentorship log. So in terms of what the EU usually asks for reporting, I think that this will cover your one-to-one meetings, or if you have very, very, very small groups of people, that you can put the name, the date, the topic. If you have any notes, that could be useful for you, and signature if in person. If you do a digital or phone, then you can just write that. I think that would be fine. And if that person traveled to you, or vice versa, if you traveled to them and it was paid for by the project, then you note that you've kept the boarding pass. So when it comes to reporting to the EU that you've actually done this supervision mentorship activities that are written into the project, this will form the a core piece of what you will upload into the funding intenders portal as part of your final reporting. So now we're back to the activity report template, and we're resuming partway through this list. Presentations, material used, press releases, and any resulting media, social media, photos, evaluations. Everything that I have just mentioned, including the top things on the list there, the whole from invitations to evaluations. This is information that you should be collecting for the purposes of uploading to the EU as part of the final reporting. On to the EU logo and disclaimer. It is a requirement of the EU that anything produced by the project and paid for with EU money has the EU logo on it. So, and it doesn't even matter how tiny it is. Let's use this pencil, for example. Normally in EU projects you can't buy office supplies. It's covered under overhead, so they wouldn't accept this as a cost. But say we made it Promise branded and we used EU money for that, then it would be the Promise logo, and also the EU logo would need to be somewhere on it as well. In other cases, that wouldn't really work for this, you also need to say funded by the EU. I think realistically, they would not mind that we didn't say this on a pen. But on other smaller instances, then you would need to say that. In most instances, we need to not only say that it was funded by the EU and have the EU logo, we also need to have a disclaimer. And it's a specific text that they want, and they've gotten more strict about the text that they want in recent years. So to help you to follow the guidelines about the EU logo and text, we have developed something that we call a standard backpage. And essentially what this is, bring it on screen. It's a last page that we propose that you use for any documents that you create in the project. It has this basic text about Promise on it. It has the logos of the partners to Promise 3, and it includes the EU logo, and it has the text at the bottom. There are a few different versions of this that you can use. For example, this version here is actually a PowerPoint slide format. And then there are two Word document formats. One that is static text, so you can't edit it, and then the other is it's regular text. So if you wanted to translate it, for example, or the text at the bottom says this publication, maybe you want to, change the way that it's describing what this document is that you're putting it on, then you can use that version of the Word document. The best looking versions are always going to be the PDFs. So if you are skilled with just dropping in one page of a PDF into the end of a larger PDF, then that's the best way to use it. Otherwise, there's several versions here for you to use. But not only do we have this standard back page to help you with the EU logo and disclaimer, we also have other templates here for you to help with that. For example, we have a template PowerPoint. This PowerPoint has, I'm updating it, it will be updated soon, but it has the essential information about Promise. It has the map about, where we are in Europe, and it has, of course, the disclaimer and EU logo at the end, and it has all the logos and the colors are right. So that's a great option for you to use. Additionally, we have something called the Promise Agenda document template. So this document, if you scroll to page 2, has the standard back page already in it for you, but it also has the Promise logo in the header. It has this fancy look to it that mimics our normal look within Promise, and you can use this document for pretty much anything. It could be for an invitation, agenda, a concept note, the evaluation form, a letter, whatever you've got that would fit into a Word document. This is a great document to start using. And of course, there will be times that you need to create a document or create something that there isn't a template for issued by us. And that's absolutely okay for you to branch out and make something else. We just ask that you follow the guidelines, the style guidelines, and use the logo and the correct colors. And you will find all of that information in Teams in the folder with the logo and the fonts, etc. back to the activity report template, let's get to evaluations. So when you're holding an event, and indeed perhaps other times, you might want to evaluate your performance, evaluate others' experience of what you have arranged. So, and indeed we have written in many places in the project description that we will be doing evaluations of our activities as we go along. So first of all, you need to read the project description and specifically the deliverables that you are assigned to do in this project to see if we have described that you will be doing evaluations of those activities, and then this is one of the things that you'll be sending to the EU at the end of the project. There is no established format for this. We do have a few examples of evaluations that we have done in other events, in other projects, for you to see and take inspiration from. But every group, every event, every activity is different, so there is no standard format. As for the last two things on the list here, procurement proof on file for all expenses, and boarding passes, train tickets, bus tickets, etc. These are not things that you'll send to the CBSS or that you will upload to the EU, at least at this point. I don't think they will be changing that anytime soon. But you do need to keep them on file. And in terms of procurement proof, so let's actually take a look at what the rules are according to the EU. You should be selecting the tender offering the best value for money, or, as appropriate, the tender offering the lowest price. So you don't have to pick the lowest price. It's best value for money first. And you need to show that there is no conflict of interest. In practice, this means that generally you need to have show that you have compared costs across a number of providers for anything. It means essentially that almost anything that you buy, you need to have evidence that you compared costs somehow. So whether that is notes from phone calls to get quotes on how much dinner would be for so many people, or if it's printouts from a few different websites about printing costs, things of this nature. And then when it comes to following your procurement rules about when do you need a written contract, when do you need a tender, when do you need these levels of procurement, that's when your normal procurement rules come into play. So say, for example, that your procurement guidelines in your organization say that once you hit the 5,000 euro threshold for a contract, that's when you have to have written tenders or something like this. Those rules still apply. However, the rules for showing that you did procurement apply to all costs to the project, no matter how small. So then when it comes to boarding passes, train tickets, bus tickets, these types of things, you don't have to collect them from everybody. You do have to collect them from people whose travel has been paid for by the project. And we need this information because it forms part of the proof that the person traveled, that the meeting happened, And what happens on the flip side is, if we are ever questioned about this in an audit or similar, and we can't prove that the person actually traveled, then it's considered that the person didn't travel and that the cost doesn't belong to the project, and then the organization responsible for that cost actually has to pay it back to the EU. And that's actually the core of a lot of the reporting and documentation that we need to keep in the project. It's to prove that it happened, also to show the impact of it, but moreover, to safeguard that your organization does not have to pay money back to the EU in case of an audit or similar. To show that all of the costs that you're claiming on the project are eligible according to the rules laid out by the EU in those documents that we looked at earlier in this video. Now we're done with the top part of this activity report template. So when you are planning an event, or really anything, you have this document in front of you, and you can put your planning notes and get everything in order as you go along. Then you're going to have everything in order by the time you are done and ready to report the event. And that's when the bottom part comes along. Now, this may look extensive and strange, especially at the end, but there is a reason. When we get activity reports from our partners about what has happened and what the outcome is, it often has left us with some questions about, what's next. They didn't write anything about what's next. So that's the purpose of this bit here. So it's the title of the event. What topics did you talk about? If you had any co-organizers, this is where you would put that. The dates, the location. Of course, summarizing the type of participants you had and the presenters. The main presentations, the main discussions. We want to know about what the outcomes were. Were there any decisions, for example? Were there any new partnerships as a result? Is there a new law that has been discussed and drafted? These types of things. What are the next steps? It's a requirement with the evaluations that you don't just do the evaluations, but that you also do something with the results. So that's what this next part is here. Summarize how the participants evaluated the meeting. And here's where you can put your links to different medias online, and also a note in case this activity was arranged slightly differently from how it's described in the project description. This is a good place to note it. Even if we have had that conversation on the sidelines of another meeting or in a phone call or whatever, please note it here so that anybody who looks at this activity report has that same information. And recommendations. If you have any recommendations that you would like to put forward either to the project team or to the EU, then we'd love to hear about them there. Now this next part is where it starts to look a bit odd. The purpose of this is what tends to happen in EU projects is you get to the end of the project and then there's a whole different format of which you need to take this square peg that you've been working with your reporting and fit it into a round hole. So I'm trying to make this into the same shaped object here by providing you with a concise framework for capturing all of that different information that we need at the end while it's still fresh. So in terms of, for example, how many men, women, and other participated. Yes, we need to report this to the EU at the end of the project. So let's gather this information already now. We also need to indicate the groups of persons who were involved to describe what kind of background they come from. Are they academic? Are they children? Are they EU policymakers? Are they law enforcement authorities? National authorities? So then you would put the number of persons in the column there. A tip: when you are making your evaluation form, it is wise to pick the handful of groups of persons that you would find useful and ask people to check off what they belong to. Then you automatically get those numbers. And then finally, the last bit here is to specify the type of material that you used. So, for example, if you wrote a newsletter about this event, or you posted several social media posts, or a post on your website, if you handed out a booklet that's paid for by the project, then you can put that information here. And the last page is, of course, the standard back page. It's already there for you. So now we're done with the activity report template, which is meant to help you in your organization and your reporting to make it all streamlined and concise. And we've taken a look at the different type of documents and data that we need. I'm back in the Resources tab under Keep These Resources for Final Reporting and for Meetings, specifically. Let's take a look at what is required at different phases of the project. This top bit here, about any time you hold a meeting, these documents are collected for reporting in the EU Funding and Tenders portal. So this first list here, from activity report down to statistics, this is information that you will collect and upload into the EU Funding and Tenders portal at some point. And there's two of these things that we ask you to upload as soon as they are ready in your private channel here in Teams. And that's your activity report and the photos, media, social media links. And this is for two reasons. One, if we get these things as we go along during the project, then we will actually make different communications about your progress and your results and your activities during the project. It's one of the most interesting things that we communicate from Promise. And two, so that when it comes time to report this data to the EU, the parts of that reporting that falls to the lead partner to organize, we will get all of that information from, at least for the activities, from the activity reports that you submit. Now, if we go down to the next bit here, from boarding passes, proof of procurement, travel authorization forms. So if you're traveling to a meeting and your travel costs are paid for by the project, and you have a travel policy, in your organization, then you need to have documents showing that you followed your travel policy. Those things down there are not things that you upload to the EU, rather you keep them on file in some organized fashion. And in fact, everything listed here you need to additionally keep on file for at least 5 years from the final payment. We're coming now to the end of this video. Thank you so much for your careful attention. We have just a few final points to take a look at. The first is about deadlines. Now, especially in COVID times where there's so much uncertainty, there always is uncertainty anyway, but even more now than usual. It will be really important that we are in regular contact with one another, both from the CBSS with each and every partner, but also with each partner and each other when and where the work that you are doing impacts how others are able to continue and finish their work on time. Please speak up in advance as soon as you see that there is a risk that a deadline on your end will be delayed, and work with both the CBSS and the partners involved to figure out what a good strategy would be to make sure that we're able to deliver on time, high quality outputs in Promise 3 as much as is possible, how we've described in the project description, to make amendments and ask for amendments when we need to amend our internal timelines when necessary. Let's work together to make this happen. And that's it. Thank you so much. You've made it through the introduction. Now we're getting to the advanced things that you need to know about reporting and communication and documentation in Promise 3. Let's get right into it. So when you go into Teams, one of the templates that we have ready for you in here is called Template for Quarterly Progress Final Reporting. So this is indicating the 3 types of reporting that we are to do in this project. The final reporting, of course. The progress report happens about halfway through the project. We have to send it within 30 days of the midway point. But then we also have quarterly reporting, and this isn't to the EU, this is within the project. We have written in the project description at the request of the EU that we have quarterly reporting. This is the template that we have designed with the purpose in mind that this is the only, aside from the activity reports, this is the only template that we're going to have throughout the whole project for all of the reporting. And it's been developed on the backside of the experience with reporting in Promise 2, where instead of waiting to the very end of the project to figure out how to report all of this data in the strange ways that the EU wants us to report it, that we build this into our templates from day one so that there's no surprises, there's no big rush, we've got it all under control from the very beginning. So the way that I see this working is that you will have the Word version of this template in your private channel in Teams in the Files section, and you will update this regularly. And when it comes time to submit this as part of a report of some sort, either a quarterly report, you're requesting your next payment, as part of your progress report or the final report, that you will take however you have this at that time updated and save it as a PDF. And then, one of the names will be quarterly or progress or something like this. What this document does is up in the top right corner here, it says report submitted. That date constantly updates. So this way I have a very concrete piece of evidence that you did actually submit a report to me and that date, and this was the information that we had at the time. And this is somewhat important because it was our experience in Promise 2 where in that project as well, the EU requested that we added quarterly reporting into the project. But it was very difficult to actually administer this quarterly reporting. When you have a ton of partners, I think there are 2, we had 12, and then you times that by 4, and then how many reports do you have, and on top of all the other things. So it just became very unwieldy. And if they did ask me for evidence that quarterly reports happened, I could definitely cobble something in together to prove that, but it would be very messy and time consuming. So from our perspective, in terms of checking off the list of documents that we need, that's one check done. Let's scroll down a bit. Before I scroll down a bit, one recommendation that we have is, I've heard from a couple of partners who have said they're planning to reserve 1 day a month to look at all of their project reporting and update everything. I think this is really smart. Not only is it smart from the perspective of making sure that you don't forget anything and that you keep up with everything slowly, but also if you do actually reserve that time and you do actually regularly look at these things and update them and get into that process and get into that habit, then eventually it's not going to take you very long to update everything, and you're going to really know what the expectations are, and it's going to be very easy to keep up with everything as you go along. So I can really recommend that, especially for any of you who are very new to EU projects. So we start off here by asking about national developments. This is something that can change quite rapidly, so it would be great if you update this as you go along. Don't delete stuff, just keep adding on top of it. Main achievements within the project, results and impacts, publications. So this is an example of the type of information that the EU always requests at the end of the project, but that we don't collect in this kind of format early on. So we're doing it earlier on now. If you do develop any kinds of publications, you should pick what type of document it is, how many of that type of document did you write. There's a check here to confirm that you included the EU logo and disclaimer, and then in the last bit you write the title and description and how it was disseminated. And then when we get to activities, it's the same kind of thing. You first pick the type of activity that it was, how many did you do, if you use the EU logo and disclaimer, the total budget of this activity, and then you get to describing the activity, the materials used, the results and impact. There you should hopefully already have an activity report for this activity that has all of that information. And for those things, you can reference that activity report if you wish. That would make that a lot easier. And then with everything, we need to know the number of persons reached as a result of the activity. Again, hopefully you have already collected this information for the most part in the activity report template, but if not, here you go. Staffing often changes within a project, and we need to keep the EU informed that these staffing changes have happened, including letting them know about new names assigned to the project, and we need to continually send them CVs. A great example is within this project itself. For many of the partners, there was only maybe one person assigned to the project from when we wrote the description, and then the rest were to be confirmed or to be decided. In some cases, there were no names whatsoever. So now is the time already. So as when you are getting ready to submit a request for your first payment, one of the requirements actually is to have this staffing list done, and to make sure all of your CVs are uploaded to your private channel in Teams. As you know, child safeguarding is mainstreamed in this project, so we take an opportunity in this reporting template to ask you about ethical issues and such. Of course, please follow whatever other guidance is issued when it comes to issues that need to be followed up on. Sustainability, long-term impact, and continuation. This is especially important at the end of the project when we're reporting to the EU. What are your next steps? How will you continue to use the outcomes of this project? How will these outcomes continue to influence developments in your country? We want to know about other issues such as unexplained events. Don't worry, we've got COVID under control, but maybe there's a specific unforeseen event or situation that impacts how you are able to implement your deliverables as described in the project. And this is where you would describe that. We want to know about your budget use, specifically if you may have a significant underspend. And if you do have significant underspend, we want to know early, and we want to know why. It's especially important to communicate this to the CBSS as soon as you know. I know that it's, can be a moving target, so it's kind of hard to pin down sometimes what that amount will be and why. But often we have ideas of ways to expand other planned activities when and if we have the funding to do so. So if you do have a big leftover, let us know, and we might be able to take advantage of that in a smart, strategic way. Similarly, there might be partners who need a bit of extra funding because of an unforeseen thing. So please, let's stay in good contact about this. Of course, in terms of budget consumption, also if you transferred between budget lines, budget headings, this is where you should keep all of those notes throughout the project. I should maybe also say that this template is not a template that we're going to ever deliver directly to the EU. This is delivered to the CBSS for the purposes of taking in all of the information that we get from all of the partners and then delivering it to the EU. So you can feel free to be transparent here with us and specific about things that you wouldn't necessarily want others to know the details of. This document is between the CBSS and your organization. Unforeseen subcontracts. I doubt very much that any partners in the project will have something like this come up. And if you do, I would rather that we ask for an amendment. An example of this might have been if you realized that one of your training coordinators needed to be subcontracted rather than an employee of your organization, then we probably would have rather make an amendment specifically for that so that there's no questions whatsoever. But if something like that comes up, then please put it here. The EU always wants to know if their projects are complementary to other EU national international projects. Here, though, they are also trying to figure out if there's any risks of double funding. You might be familiar with this concept of double funding, where the EU is worried that funding from one project will be used to cover the same exact expense. So if and when you have multiple projects going on at the same time that appear to be being used for the same kinds of activities, then you'll need to be able to clearly explain how they are different and to show that they truly have separate accountings and you're not taking money from two different sources to pay for the same expense. I don't believe this is an issue in this project. Of course, there's a lot of different funding opportunities going on simultaneously for Barnahus projects throughout the EU. So if you have specific questions about this, let's take it one by one. And then we get to the list of events. So hopefully this page is very easy for you to fill in. If you have been filling in all of your activity reports, then it's very easy. If you have things that you don't have an activity report for some reason, there might be a legitimate reason that we haven't found out yet. That's fine. That's why you have this list here, so you can make sure that you are listing all of the any time that you have gathered people in a room together paid for by this project. That's what goes on this list. And you'll notice that compared to the activity report, it looks very similar. You have the same name, theme, topic column. You have the type of event and the format, the dates. So use this part to make sure that, especially for things that we for some reason don't have an activity report for, that we have all of that data up to duration, male participants, female participants. Everything after that part is a checklist for you. And it's at this point that I want to highlight that, for example, if you, when you're collecting all of the documents, that you're going to upload to the EU in the EU Funding and Tenders portal for the final reporting of the project, when you're doing that, and you noticed, for example, that you had an agenda that doesn't have the EU logo on it, or you have a presentation given by you that doesn't have the EU logo on it, it's a great time to check all of those things and to add that standard back page now before uploading it to the portal. Because what actually happens is, if the EU is checking on these things and it finds something that doesn't have the logo and such, they will ask us to put the logo on it and resubmit it. So this is what is expected. from the EU and from us. Then when we scroll down to the next bit, the instruction to you is to delete any of the sections of this next few pages that doesn't apply to you. So if you're a national partner, then immediately these ones apply to you. Bonegi, you only keep this section. Child circle, you only keep this section. Offbeat, you only keep this section. Terezom, you only keep that section, etc. The purpose of this part of this template is so that you can regularly update your status on any given activity here, what has been done so far, what has been planned, what is coming up soon, anything else that we need to know. What this section is it's a list of the deliverables that you are responsible for reporting to the EU. It's the list of deliverables that you need to collect all of the documents for and upload those documents in the EU Funding and Tenders portal. Now, when should you actually do that? Ideally, you should do that as soon as all of the things that are described in this deliverable are completed. This may or may not be on or before the date that that deliverable is due. In the portal, we had to assign everything due dates. The deliverable will turn red somehow when it's late, according to the portal. Don't worry about that. Submit everything when it's done. At the very latest, 1 month after the closing of the project. And why is this? Within 1 month of the closing of the project, it should be possible for you to have all of the documents ready, because everything should have already been done, been completed the month prior to that date. So it may be that there's some lingering documents that haven't gotten back to you and such. Fine. So you have up to a month after the closing of the project to upload those documents in the portal. And with a number of the deliverables that we have here, I've also pasted in the description of the deliverables. So this is actually how we have described what you are planned to deliver in the portal, in the project description. So this is here for you as a resource. And then the final page in this template is, of course, an opportunity for you to update. If you get any new EU funding, then you should add it to this list. That way we can add it to our reporting to the EU. But now that we've gotten to the end of this, I think it's a good opportunity to talk about reporting in the EU Funding and Tenders portal. I'm actually going to go there right now in the way that I would suggest you go there in case you don't already have this link bookmarked somewhere. And I would go here. Here we are. Plugging in. Losing my voice. And here we are. So when it comes to Promise 3, you want to click on Actions, click on Manage Projects. When you go into Continuous Reporting, you get a new page that looks like this. So, for example, Project Kickoff Meeting will be held online, of course. When I'm ready to upload, I click here, I go to the single PDF or zipped file that I want to upload. I select it and I go through the process to upload it. When you do that, it doesn't send it to the EU right away, it sends it to me. So no worries if you accidentally submit it and you want to reverse, let me know. I'll let things sit there for some time. This is where you see the estimated delivery date that I mentioned before, that if it goes over, don't worry so much. That is how you upload documents in the Funding and Tenders portal. There's a lot of other sections in this part here that you can look at if you want, but you're not responsible for anything there. Any publications, anything having to do with the dissemination and the training activities, that's all something that we at the CBSS will do on the basis of your activity reports and that reporting template that I just presented. Something else that I want to show you while we are in the Funding and Tenders portal is about assigning people to your projects. You might have already figured this out, but maybe at a later date you will have forgotten. So let's go here. Let's go to Actions. Let's go to Manage Consortium. And a question that I often get is asking me to add people from your organization to this portal so that they are assigned to the project, so that they receive emails. And and while I do have this ability, it's much better if you do it. You have more options than I do. For example, if I go into CBSS and I go to Edit Roles, then if I want to add somebody, so let's say, for example, we have a new F sign or a new PL sign. These are not people that I can assign on your project. The only people that I can assign are contacts. So it's actually much better if you are able to go in and do team member, first name, last name, email. Then that person gets access just like how I'm able to do. And when you put in their first name, last name, and email, they will get the information email that they've been added, and they can log in and get access. You can also take people away. You just click this trash button. The portal does send a lot of emails that seem scary and yet insignificant at the same time. So I can understand if some people don't want to receive emails anymore. While you are here, there is something that you absolutely need to do before the end of the project, and that is enable Lear access. Mine says disable because I've already enabled it, but if yours says enable, then you want to click on it so that your Lear is able to access this project. I don't really know what it does, you just have to do it. While we are here, and while Promise 2 is still not completely finalized, we have the ability to show you this screen. And this screen is what the final reporting from the financial side will look like for you when you're reporting your final use of funding to the EU at the very end of the project. And at that time, so here, for example, you can see that I can't edit any of the numbers because they're done, but it would look like this. When you are doing the final reporting in the EU Funding and Tenders portal, they want you to specify a big cost and what work package it belonged to. How do you know what work package it belonged to? There's a few ways that you can find out. Way number one is you go to your reporting template here. And for example, for a number of these, it already has the deliverable number. If you're a national partner, you have to put in your own number because it's different for everybody. They have two here. They have D 2.12. So that means that this procedural safeguards is in work package 2 because it's D2 point. And then it's output number 12, or deliverable number 12, within the list of deliverables in the project description. Here in the very beginning, you have this list of deliverables. So let's say that you are a national partner and national follow-up and mentorship on the trainings and forensic interviews. Let's see, let's say I'm Bulgaria here. Then it's D2.3 is my number. Earlier in this video, I introduced which one is the work package number. It's actually the first number. D2 stands for the 2 is the work package. So that's what this would be. Another thing about finalizing your financial report in the EU Funding and Tenders portal will be the calculation of your human effort. To complete this, you will need a few pieces of information, or a few different types of documents. You'll need the project description. That's the easiest resource probably to figure out how much of your effort went to different work packages. That's how you're going to find out what the work packages are and what they contain. You'll need the human effort calculation guidance, and of course you'll find this in the resources tab. So you'll find it here, the person months calculation guidance, human effort. You'll also need your staff calculation sheets. This will give you the total time spent on the project, of course, if you calculate it all together. And you'll need to know your regulated hours per day. Since you're calculating your hours in your timesheets, then you'll need to know how many hours goes into one day. You may need to know some other things as well. Maybe, for example, your average work days per month. In your timesheets, for the purposes of calculating your human effort, you might want to consider that your timesheets calculate your time by work package. And if you have your staff calculation sheets, then you don't need your timesheets because all of the time should be calculated in your staff calculation sheets. And I want to emphasize that there is absolutely nothing that I can do on my end to access this, to fix anything having to do with your numbers and your data, etc. And there is a separate short video that I have made showing you the process of how to fix things here. You should review it towards the end of the project when we're getting ready to actually do the financial reporting. And I also want to emphasize that you need to very carefully follow all of the instructions step by step. It's very easy to miss something. The instructions, of course, will be in Teams in this folder about Project Management Essentials. When you go into final reporting, right now there is a PDF of a PowerPoint of the steps. If I get any new guidance, it will be in this folder. I will also probably inform everybody that there is new guidance. This other PDF of guidance may also be of use. Of course, you can look at the Horizon 2020 online manual. If you come up against some sort of weird technical problem, you can email the IT help desk. Going back to our resources here, you see the IT help desk here. If you're back in here, oh yeah, actually, you have the IT help desk right at the bottom here. Oh, clicked it. There we are. In terms of the funding and tenders portal, you can go to guidance and manuals. There's also FAQ, support services. When you are here, you have a link right here to the H2020 online manual. You have this big green how-to button. That button generally sends you to a page that has to do with the page that you're on right now. May or may not be as helpful. When you are in here, is there any? No. If you're here and you need help, you've got to go looking somewhere else. In the Promise Files section, we also have Project Management Essentials from EU, EC, CBSS. In here you'll find the visibility rules that has to do with the EU logo and such. And you'll find what I was just talking about right now, the guidance for L sign, PL sign, etc. And then we have the list of receipts and the staff calculation. Let's take a look first at the list of receipts. So here we are in the list of receipts. This is a template that you should use for keeping track of all of the costs that you have in the project. This is one of the few financial reporting templates that we ask that you upload into your private channel in Teams along with your other reporting. Let's take a look at the basics here. Up top, don't touch any of this. This is automatically calculated on the basis of what you put down here. These specific lines, please delete them. They are here to show you approximately what you should be doing. So you want to make sure that you have a description of the item, that you have the accounting reference. This should be having the link to your ledger. If you are recording costs like we do, we don't have, all of our books are kept in Swedish kroner, not in euros. So then we have to make a conversion. So you do that here. And a really important thing here is to not lump too many things together, because in the end, if we are ever to be audited on this project, then having each individual accounting reference here will be a big time saver on your side. We are not asking in this project that you submit receipts and proof of payment and contracts and all of that. So keeping a good record here is going to be essential to making sure that you've got everything in order and can get everything in order quick enough when needed. Another part about not lumping things together too much is about noticing the budget heading. So for example, let's say that I had meeting A. So let's say that's the cost for the meeting. The problem is now you have to fill in the details here. Surely you could put a number of accounting references all in one cell here, and that would be fine. But the issue then becomes the budget heading. Because at the end of the day, we need to report to the EU all of our costs according to their budget headings. So in this meeting A with 30 people, we might have had travel costs, venue costs, interpreters, catering costs. When we go up here and we look at direct travel and direct subsistence, these are two separate things. The plane trip or the train trip is on a different line than the hotel and per diem, which is on a different line from the interpreter. So you can't lump all of these things here. You have to separate them out, preferably invoice by invoice, so that you can capture it all accurately and it calculates up here effortlessly. And in case you have more questions about what are considered eligible costs under each of these budget headings, you can of course refer to the grant agreement, the guide for applicants, and perhaps most relevant is this one again, the annex on financial provisions. Specifically here we're looking at section 3, detailed provisions on eligible expenditure. Just scrolling through real quick, we've got the specifics about employment costs under A. We've got specifics on travel costs under B1 and B2. There are a couple of things that you need to be aware of when it comes to travel and subsistence costs. And you'll find all of the key information that you need to know in this document that we're looking at right now. There's a whole section here, 3.2, on the specifics in terms of hotel ceilings and per diem amounts, when you can take certain classes of transportation, the information that you need to keep on file. This has to do with the hotel ceilings, the maximum amount for hotel per night. This has to do with the maximum amounts you're allowed to budget for things, for subsistence costs. This link here is the most recent maximum amounts for per diem. The rule is that you should follow the rule for per diems is that you should be following your standard per diems policy if you have them. Otherwise, these are the maximums, and we use these maximums when we are budgeting approximately for example, if we are providing lunch or dinner, what's the maximum amount that we should keep in mind, which would be reasonable to offer lunches and dinners for a group of participants. And for those per diem rates, you can go to that link, and then there's a big golden button here, check per diem rates, and this is the latest update. The actual amounts have not been updated in quite a long time. It says here 2017, and they've been negligibly raised for many years. Maybe after COVID there will be some changes. C and E are quite interesting about subcontracting and other costs. So subcontracting in this project, it doesn't include things like translation and design and such. That all falls under category E as a service. So subcontracting here is more about, for example, the trainers that we are bringing in and the experts who we will be contracting for different purposes on the real contextual part of this project. And so this is an important thing for you to note when making your list of receipts. And there are other things in here that you should, of course, know about. So please read this carefully. A quick word on overheads. If you're even just a little bit new to EU projects, you've probably picked up on the fact that there's a lot of detail that goes into everything. Not quite everything. The one exception that proves the rule is indirect costs or overheads, category F. And this is booked as a lump sum. You do not need to keep receipts or procurement proof or need to prove that it was spent on anything whatsoever. You just get a lump sum, which is a percentage of your total direct costs. And your total direct costs are the A, B, C, D, E from your list of receipts. And that's it. A note about bookkeeping when it's not in euros. In Sweden, we have to keep all of our bookkeeping in Swedish kroner. So we are in the same boat. And in case you already are familiar with how EU projects have done in the past, where it was the info euro rate, and for each expense in the list of receipts, you had to use the rate on the month that the date that invoice was paid. That could be a good practice to continue for the list of receipts during the project, but according to the grant agreement, that is no longer the final word on the amount, or the final exchange rate that you use should actually be the average from the project period. To calculate this, you can go into the Resources tab, and I've just added this easy access link here. And when you click on it, well, it sends you to the Swedish kroner one, but you can pick your own here. And then what you would do is you would set the date. Let's say, for example, if we had an insanely long project period. So say this is the first date of the project and this is the last date of the project. It actually creates an average for you right here. So that's the average that you would use for your exchange rate when calculating costs in the list of receipts. A word on unusual costs. When you are keeping records, including your procurement proof and your receipts and proof of payment and all of this, it's really wise to also keep a note, somehow, of anything unusual that might stick out. Things like taxis. Taxis are usually very frowned upon on EU projects. So all taxi usage should have a clear justification as to why it was taken. Things that have worked for us in the past are very early or very late travel to catch flights and things like this. In case a meeting ends close to when a flight takes off, instead of having to deal with extra time that public transit adds. If you're carrying a lot of materials, especially if they are meeting materials. If you are quite many people in the taxi, I mean, especially if you get like a little taxi bus kind of thing, then it almost becomes transportation built within the meeting almost. But especially if a taxi is actually cheaper than taking public transportation. So make notes. I sometimes use sticky notes, for example. I'll actually stick these in with the receipts, or I'll make a note when I'm actually doing the accounting, or sometimes I'll print off an email conversation that I've had with someone saying, yeah, I'm going to take a taxi because there is no other way to get from the airport to this venue. So that is one. Very expensive travel as well. If for some reason you need to book a very long distance flight, like Malta to Iceland, like we have done in a project past, and it was very expensive, and I had email conversations where we spent a few days going back and forth trying to, can you go a day earlier? It would be 300 euros cheaper, and no, that won't work out because we have meetings with our ministers, and so it became the way it is, and that was accepted. It's good to keep alternative evidence that somebody attended a meeting. So, as you might already know, when you pay for travel within a project, it's not enough to have receipts of that travel, that you paid the flight and that you had the receipts and all of this, but you also have to prove that the person traveled. And if the person didn't travel, for example, they didn't fly on their flight, or they didn't stay in their hotel room, then that cost is actually cancelled from the project, and it's supposed to be covered by overhead. One of the ways that we keep track that people have traveled is, of course, by collecting boarding passes. Another way is by having signatures on the signed participants list, the signature sheet. Alternative ways, in case you didn't get a boarding pass, or in case you didn't get that signature, take good photos so that you can always go back and point people out in those photos. Print off email communications from the people you're missing boarding passes and signatures from, because those might also be used as verification that people traveled. Sometimes I have saved, if I did a dinner sign-up sheet, or if you have an evaluation form, have that person put their name and signature on it. So that way you have a few different options of making sure that you can prove that the people who you've paid to travel actually did travel. And on the flip side, for people who canceled their participation, it happens quite often that people cancel at the last minute. Some other meeting comes up, they get sick, they have a sick family member. Almost no explanation is accepted, but keep the reason anyway, in case your auditor feels nice and wants to accept that justification. Also keep any record of decisions, including, for example, if a participant were to, say, travel a day earlier or stay a day longer, what was the reason? Did it cost any more money, or was it cheaper? Sometimes it happens, if you have someone traveling from Iceland, for example, that for them to stay one more night and travel the next day, it's quite a lot cheaper, even counting in the hotel costs. Or if you have emails with decisions of that you decided to change the topic of something, or that meeting will be in a different location, it's good to print out those emails and put them in a binder, or put them in a folder somewhere where it's completely impossible that anybody is going to delete them, so that in case you need that extra explanation, you've got it somewhere. So now the last template that we haven't looked at yet is the staff cost calculation sheet. There is specific guidance in the core EU documents from the EU, the grant agreement, the financial provisions, the guide for applicants, that specify what is an eligible cost and what isn't. For the most part, those eligible costs are listed here. You have the gross salary, holiday allowance, employer's contribution to statutory pensions, employer's contribution to Social Security, other statutory costs. Now, this can include costs that are specified in, for example, your collective agreement or similar document. You'll notice that bonuses are not included, and of course salary and all of these things should be normal. You shouldn't be getting paid more because you're in a project, for example. Just like with the timesheets as presented in the introduction video, we have two columns here. We've got columns worked on this hours worked on this project and hours worked on other projects or activities. So then when it comes to actually reporting your staff cost, when you take this amount and you put it in the list of receipts, you should have one line per person per year. You don't need to do it monthly because this calculation spreadsheet is already taking care of all of that. So when you have this whole thing filled out, it will become obvious that you need to use the, in column N, there's a bit of red text right now that says this amount should be equal to the amount reported in the detailed budget execution. So when you actually make that line in the list of receipts for that one person each year, that amount should be this amount from this Excel spreadsheet. I want to emphasize here that we, as part of the first payment procedure, we want samples of all of the supporting documents that would go behind all of these employment costs. So that means timesheets, salary slips, proof of payments, including invoices and proof of payments for Social Security, pensions, all of these things. You can redact these, so you can darken and cross off, make invisible the personal information, including names. So we only need one from one person, one set of these documents from one person. And the purpose of this is so that when and if we need to ask for more information, we can show you a sample of what we at this time, thought would be the right kind of documentation to show. So the reason why that I'm mentioning audits quite often here, the demand on you as a partner in terms of being able to keep all of the correct documentation and gather it all on a moment's notice if needed is quite high. So we feel pretty confident that if at this time you're able to supply the right kind of documents, these samples, that we can support anybody who comes after you to do that again on a bigger scale that would be required in case of audit. Because at the end of the day, any documents and explanations, etc., that the project partners are not able to provide the EU if requested could mean that the cost is canceled from the project and that the money either isn't paid out to us or we have to pay it back. So these are the stakes as such, and the steps that we are taking to protect you, each partner, and the whole Promise program. We're now getting to the tail end of this video. We just have a few points left to cover. The first is about requests for payments and follow-up payments. You probably have read about this in the consortium agreement, but you'll also find an easy reference of these things here in the resources tab, required for first payment and required for follow-up payments. Now, it's our goal to make this as easy to administrate as possible on your side and our side. The requirements are a bit higher for the first payment because we will pay out quite a significant chunk of money, more than we have in any of our prior projects. That will hopefully, with the streamlined reporting templates that we've made, will hopefully make it a lot simpler for you to keep up to date with your reporting with us, and so that when it comes time to request a second or maybe third payment, depending on how often you want to request, then it will be easy for you to meet the requirements to get the next payment. You may submit your request for payments at any time. We have some guidance on when to do this. We essentially want to see that you've spent a good chunk of that money, that you have a notable amounts of activities left to go, and that you're in really good shape with the technical and financial reporting that you should be submitting to us. The final 20% of your EU contribution to your part of the project, to your EU budget, we will hold on to this until we get the final payment from the EU, which coincidentally is the final 20% of the EU contribution to the whole project. So here we are in this folder of templates, and there are very few that we haven't talked about yet. One of them is the assignment letter template. This has to do with, it's a formality within EU projects, getting confirmation that each person who's assigned to the project actually is assigned to the project. I recommend that you do these at the same time that you add each new person to the staffing list in your reporting template. It's quite common in a project that you might be undertaking one of your activities or deliverables in a way that differs from how you've described how that activity or deliverable is described in the project description. And often this is something that is quite okay, that you just need to, when you're doing the reporting for that activity or deliverable, that you just need to justify why that change was made. And other times it's something that needs an amendment of the project. So things that would need an amendment would be, for example, a large change in scope for an activity. An example of this was in Promise 2, we had planned just a small project partner meeting at the end, but this instead turned into a much bigger activity. It was the launch of the network, and we used money that we saved in other places in the project to be able to have this big event. And since this was such a big scope change, we requested an amendment for it. On the contrary, small changes in scope might not need an amendment at all. It depends. Another thing, for example, if you wanted to add another activity that's quite similar to something else that you have planned, or it is the same, it's just another one of something that you have planned, that can often be added into the project provided you have budget left. Without needing to make an amendment, you just justify it in reporting the project. On the flip side of that, though, if you want to add an activity or an event or a deliverable that in no way could be described as being part of another, or another one of the same of a deliverable or activity in a project, then you probably do need an amendment. Also, change of location or date of a meeting usually don't need an amendment. However, activities that will take place outside of the project period, so either before the project begins or after the project ends, not allowed at all. This includes the publication and finalization of documents and publications. Everything needs to be finished within the project period. So what should you do in case you come across something that you would like to do that is a bit different from how it's described? Well, two things. First, you should, of course, talk to us at the Council of the Baltic Sea States so that we can get to know a little bit more about what you're aiming to do and how it's different and if it requires an amendment or not. And number two, in Teams, we have something called a change log. And in this change log right here, you'll note that, for example, Finland, I made a boo-boo when I was putting some data from the Finnish part of the project into the funding portal, the EU funding and tenders portal. So I actually do need to include some small amendments from this boo-boo that I made in our first amendment. So that is noted in our change log, so that it's very easy for me and everybody else on the project to keep track of these types of things, which can be easily lost in an inbox, on a to-do list, or forgotten about. A couple of other things, for example, two partners have transferred budget to CBSS for translation because they decided to centralize the translations with us rather than take them on themselves. So it would be great if you could help the CBSS to note changes and things like this in the change log so that everything is very organized and clear. So in the basic introduction to documentation, reporting, etc., the first of these videos, I noted the importance of talking with your colleagues both from the CBSS and anybody else who's impacted about if your deliverable will be delayed and what strategies to take to mitigate any effects on other people. And I really want to highlight the importance of that. We all have a responsibility to each other to do the best that we can within this project and to try to finish our work on or before deadlines. That said, bottom line, all activities and publications should be finalized well before the end of the project, not on the very final days of the project. To give due respect to the colleagues in this project who are responsible for communicating and layout and design and production and all of these, and reporting, all of these other things that go into finalizing your activities. Because none of this happens independently of all of these processes. And when there's a large number of things being finalized at the same time, It's a big stress. Thank you for taking notice of this and doing your utmost to finish everything well before it becomes a big stress for others. Congratulations, you've made it to the end of our training videos. I really hope that this has been helpful and that you will continue to use these videos as a resource as you continue to work with the project. Thanks for watching.